The morning sun caught the chrome bumper of the luxury sedan as my John Deere tractor pulled it across the rutted dirt path. Dust kicked up in thick clouds while the car bounced and scraped over every rock and pothole. Behind me, I could hear Patricia Harrington screaming like a banshee, her voice getting fainter as I drove deeper into my cornfield. She thought blocking my farm access road was just another power play in her HOA crusade. She had no idea I was done playing her game. My name is Tom Sullivan, and I've been farming this land for 30 years. My grandfather bought these 150 acres back in 1952, when this area was nothing but rolling hills and quiet country. But progress has a way of creeping in, and 5 years ago, the Meadowview Estate subdivision sprouted up right next to my eastern property line. With it came the Meadowview Homeowners Association, and with that came Patricia Harrington, self-appointed guardian of suburban perfection. From day one, Patricia made it clear she considered my farm an eyesore. She complained about the rooster crowing at dawn, even though county regulations protected agricultural operations that predated residential development. She filed complaints about the smell of fertilizer during planting season. She even tried to get the county to force me to paint my barn a more neutral color because the traditional red was too garish for her refined sensibility. I dealt with her nonsense patiently for years. When she complained about dust for my tractor, I adjusted my routes to minimize impact. When she whined about noise, I scheduled heavy equipment use for midday instead of early morning. But Patricia was the type who saw compromise as weakness, and every inch I gave, she tried to take a mile. Things came to a head 3 weeks ago when Patricia decided the gravel access road that runs between my farm and the subdivision needed to be beautified. Never mind that the road was on my property, deed to my family decades before her precious HOA existed. She showed up at my door with a stack of papers, demanding I stop using my tractor on the road because it was lowering property value. I explained calmly that the road was mine, had always been mine, and would continue to be mine, regardless of her aesthetic concerns. She huffed and puffed about community standards and threatened to take action if I didn't comply. I told her politely, but firmly, to get off my property. The look she gave me could have curdled fresh milk. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I continued my daily routine, hauling feed, moving equipment, and tending to my crops. Then came the morning that changed everything. I walked out at 5:30 a.m. to find Patricia's pristine white BMW parked sideways across my access road, completely blocking the path. She'd positioned it perfectly, right at the narrowest point between two drainage ditches, making it impossible to go around. I knocked on her door at 6 a.m. She answered in a silk robe, looking entirely too pleased with herself. I asked her politely to move her vehicle. She smirked and said, I shouldn't be farming so close to civilized people anyway. Maybe this would teach me to be more considerate of my neighbors. Then she shut the door in my face. My irrigation system was scheduled to run that morning, and I had 2 tons of feed that needed to be distributed to my livestock. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was actively interfering with my livelihood. I called the sheriff's office, but dispatch informed me they were dealing with a major accident on the interstate, and it would be at least 3 hours before anyone could respond to a parking. Standing there in the growing heat, watching my schedule fall apart, something shifted in me. I'd spent years being reasonable, years making accommodations, years trying to be a good neighbor to people who saw me as nothing more than an annoyance to be eliminated. Patricia wanted to play games with property rights. Fine, let's play. I walked back to my barn and fired up my camera, documenting everything: the position of her car, the property markers, the no trespassing signs she'd ignored. Then I got on my computer and pulled up the county records, printing out the surveys and deed information that clearly showed the road was on my property. I even found the statute that allowed property owners to remove vehicles illegally blocking private agricultural roads. By 7:30, I had everything documented. I tried calling Patricia one more time, giving her a final chance to move the car herself. She didn't answer, so I fired up the John Deere, grabbed my heavy-duty tow chains, and got to work. The chains hooked up easily to her rear axle, and I made sure to take more photos of the process. Everything by the book, everything legal. The tractor rumbled to life with a satisfying roar. I put it in gear and started forward, slow and steady. The BMW resisted for a moment, tires locked, before it began to move. I could have taken the shortest route to move it off the road, but Patricia had made this personal, so I took the scenic route instead. Through the gate and into my east pasture we went, the car bouncing and sliding behind the tractor. The pristine white paint job met its match against the tall grass and wild flowers. I heard the first scream when we were about 100 yards into the field. Patricia had discovered her missing car and was running after us in her designer heels, stumbling through the rough terrain. I didn't stop. Through the pasture and into the cornfield, down the irrigation rows where the mud was thick and dark. The car's low clearance meant it was basically plowing through the dirt, collecting a growing mass of mud and corn stalks. Patricia's screams grew louder, mixed with threats about lawsuits and criminal charges. I noticed several of her HOA board members had joined her along with other neighbors who'd heard the commotion. Good. Let them all watch. Let them see what happens when you push too far. The path led through my compost area next, where I'd been aging manure for the fall application. The smell hit like a wall, and I heard several people gagging behind me. The BMW was no longer white, but a modern art piece in browns and greens, corn husks sticking out from every crevice, mud caked inches thick on the wheels. We ended up in the middle of my south field, a good half-mile from any road. I unhooked the chains, took final photos of the car's position, and drove back toward the gathering crowd. Patricia was purple with rage, actually shaking as she screamed about destruction of property and criminal charges. Her fellow board members looked less certain, especially when I calmly presented my documentation. The sheriff arrived 2 hours later, by which time Patricia had called 911 3 more times. Deputy Morrison surveyed the scene with barely concealed amusement. I showed him my papers, the photos, the relevant statutes. Patricia ranted about theft and vandalism until he politely but firmly told her to be quiet. The investigation was thorough but straightforward. Patricia had illegally blocked a private agricultural road. I had followed proper procedure in documenting the obstruction and attempting to contact her. The law was clear about property owners' rights to remove obstructing vehicles. The fact that I'd taken the long way was perhaps excessive, but not illegal. Patricia tried to argue that I'd damaged her car unnecessarily. Deputy Morrison pointed out that any damage was a result of her illegal parking and could have been avoided if she'd simply moved when asked. Citations for trespassing and obstruction of agricultural operations, each carrying fines of $500. The tow truck driver who came to extract Patricia's car charged her triple rate for the distance and difficulty. Watching him winch the mud-caked BMW onto his flatbed while Patricia signed the credit card receipt was almost worth the years of harassment. But Patricia wasn't done. She called an emergency HOA meeting that night, demanding the board take action against the menace next door. What she didn't count on was the number of people who'd been waiting for her to overstep. Turns out I wasn't the only one tired of her petty tyranny. Neighbors shared stories of ridiculous fines, arbitrary rule changes, and personal vendettas disguised as community standards. The coup to grace came from Robert Davidson, a retired attorney who lived 3 houses down from Patricia. He'd done his homework and discovered that Patricia had been using HOA funds for personal legal consultations about harassing me. That was misappropriation of community resources, grounds for immediate removal from the board. The vote was swift and unanimous. Patricia was removed as HOA president effective immediately. The look on her face when the results were announced was priceless, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror as she realized her reign of suburban terror was over. But that wasn't the end of her troubles. The state attorney's office, alerted by Deputy Morrison's report, decided to investigate Patricia's pattern of harassment against agricultural operations. Turns out there were laws protecting farms from exactly this kind of targeted intimidation. Patricia found herself facing charges that could result in up to $5,000 in fines and 60 days in jail. Her lawyer convinced her to plead no contest, and she was sentenced to 40 hours of community service at the county agricultural center, teaching her about the importance of farming to the local economy. The judge also ordered her to pay me $3,000 in restitution for lost productivity and legal fees. As the bailiff read the sentence, Patricia's perfectly composed facade finally cracked, tears streaming down her face as she realized her power trip had cost her everything she'd worked to build in the community.